Tonight, is the internet censoring conservatives? We'll talk to the latest target who refuses to back down. It's January 11th, and you're watching The Ezra Levant Show.
Why should others go to jail when you're the biggest carbon consumer I know?
There's 8,500 customers here, and you won't give them an answer.
You come here once a year with a sign, and you feel morally superior.
The only thing I have to say to the government about why I publish it is because it's my bloody right to do so.
Milo Yiannopoulos is the name of a conservative libertarian writer and pundit and larger-than-life character. In a way, he reminds me of a sort of British Ann Coulter. Like her, he's audacious and outrageous and has a wicked sense of humor that confuses leftists, especially the social justice warriors who like to say, "That's not funny," to things that are obviously funny, but you're not supposed to laugh if you're on the political left, because laughing probably hurts someone's feelings. Now, that's not quite true, though, is it? You're allowed to be outrageous and offensive and mean if you're a left-wing comedian making a point against a conservative. I mean, that was pretty much what Jon Stewart's Daily Show did for 8 years of George W. Bush's presidency. He read Democratic Party talking points with a smirk and a sneer, and his studio audience loved it. Swearing was no problem, obviously. Being personal in his attacks was no problem. Same thing with Bill Maher on HBO. He's more even-handed on the issue of radical Islam, but even he publicly boasted of donating $1 million to the Democratic Party. If you didn't like it, well, change the channel. That's what the left says when you're offended by their words, but when conservatives make a joke, especially one that's cutting, the left goes into apoplexy. They're not actually that dainty and sheltered. They just pretend to be highly offended. They're professional offense takers when they're trying to get someone on the right fired. I mean, there's no one less funny in Canada than the CBC's Mary Walsh. You can sort of tell by all the laugh tracks the CBC has to lay on top of her sketches. She's just a political hatchet man. I can't even think of anyone on the right like that at all in Canada. They'd never be allowed on TV, let alone subsidized with tax dollars on the CBC. I mean, remember when our friend Krista Erickson at the Sun News Network was interviewing some artist who had received an enormous number of government grants for a performance with a bit of arm waving? Krista waved her hands in the same manner in an interview with her, and literally 6,500 different social justice warriors wrote to the CRTC television regulator to have her fired or the whole channel shut down. Do you see what I mean about the double standard and the professional offense taking? Well, that's what the internet was supposed to be for. A free place, unregulated by nanny state censors, not subject to the CRTC or other busybodies, a place for dissidents or rebels or outliers. Let the official TV networks be places of bland homogeneity with all the political diversities from A all the way to B. At least we could say what we want on Twitter and Facebook, right? Well, that brings us back to Milo. He's a hoot, and he knows he is, and he knows he drives the left nuts. But to be fair, there are still some people on the left who can laugh and, more to the point, know that if Milo is censored today, they'll be censored tomorrow. Milo loves pushing buttons on the social justice warrior left. He's a journalist who talks about things like high-tech issues and about radical Islam and politics in general. But over the past year, he has made a real name for himself by reporting on the attempt by radical feminists to censor video games in a scandal called Gamergate. And he's taken that battle to radical feminists in general, like when he went down to Los Angeles with our own Lauren Southern to cover a weird feminist march called the Slut Walk. Actually, now that I mention it, he and Lauren were asked to leave those public premises by police for saying the wrong things. True story. Well, this past Friday afternoon, which is when political organizations like to dump bad news so it's lost in the weekend, Twitter did something really weird. They took away Milo's status on their microblogging website, that little blue check mark that says he was verified. Now, normally that little symbol just means what it sounds like, that he was the real Milo Yiannopoulos and anyone else was just an imposter. I have a little verified checkmark too, as do many media or celebrities and feels like sports or politics. They took it away from him and didn't explain why, other than a vague comment about him violating, quote, the Twitter rules. And if he kept violating those Twitter rules, he'd be shut down altogether, and the 140,000 people who signed up for his updates would be denied the right to hear from him. How weird. They took away his verified identity as if he was no longer a real person. Talk about passive-aggressive, not telling him what he did wrong, saying he wasn't verified as a person anymore, and that if he kept saying mean things that they would not describe to him, his account would be deleted. Well, they tangled with the wrong hombre. He doubled down, pointing out Twitter's cowardly and vague censorship to the world, publishing that threat letter. Within hours, literally hundreds of other people on Twitter made his photo their photo and changed their screen names to Milo Yiannopoulos, too. It was like that scene from the movie Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
Over the weekend, 20,000 more people signed up to hear from him, followed him on Twitter, verified or not. It was such a big protest that the cheeky phrase, "Je suis Milo," I am Milo, became the top trending subject on Twitter in many countries around the world. What Twitter's anonymous social justice warrior humor police tried to shut down, well, it only grew stronger. Now, you might be thinking, all right, who cares about any of this? Who is Milo Yiannopoulos? I don't even follow Twitter. Well, listen, Twitter is a very important tool for grassroots media, for people like me and you to say things to each other and to hear from others that we couldn't do through the traditional media. I can follow people and hear what they have to say, people on the right or the left, or from anywhere in the world that I choose. I don't have to go through some editor at a newspaper or a producer at a TV censoring and filtering what I hear. And people can hear from me directly too. Again, no filter, no censorship. But now, suddenly, there are these anonymous little political elves in the bowels of Twitter saying that if you make the wrong joke, you'll be depersoned. Now, I follow some very funny comedians on Twitter, including some very rude ones who have a verified checkmark next to their names. Why can they make rude jokes, funny or not, but Milo can't? Why can leftists say what they like on Twitter, but not someone like Milo? That's what should concern you, because Twitter, Google, YouTube, Facebook, they have all announced just in the past month that they will now be censoring comments that they consider to be politically offensive. But it always seems to be from a left-wing point of view. The executive chairman of Google actually likened this to a spell check for ideas. He actually wrote that in the New York Times. Imagine if it were a right-winger who had said they were going to delete ideas on the left. I mean, civil libertarians would go ape. But when leftists say that they're going to trim and edit ideas they don't like on the right, well, so far it's been fairly quiet. From the official people at least, but for 140,000 grassroots people, they can't get enough of Milo. It's important that we fight against the crony capitalist government relationship that leads to censorship. We'll talk more about it and why after the break, when the great man himself joins us live via Skype from London, England. Don't go away. And joining us now via Skype from London is Milo Yiannopoulos himself. Welcome to the show, Milo. Great to see you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to see you again. How are you?
I'm fine, and I want to tell you how amazed I am by the last few days. The fact that Je suis Milo was the #1 trending topic in many countries. I didn't know that support for freedom of speech, or at least for your freedom of speech, was so wide and deep. Were you surprised by it?
No, because I know I'm very popular and people are very kind and very nice, and I do have like a big fan base, and they're lovely to me. But here's something you should take heart from. We really have a serious and large body of people who sincerely believe in freedom of speech now. They don't like being policed, and these people are very often disaffected liberals too. The sort of progressive establishment that wants to police people's language about sex, about race, about all this, the other kind of stuff, really now is in a tiny minority. And they might be a powerful minority, but they are a minuscule minority when you consider the enormous strength of support. I trended globally, number 3 globally trending topic. I was the number 1 trending topic in the UK, the US, Canada, and Germany. This was an enormous outpouring of support for freedom of speech, and not just for freedom of speech, but for the right to offend, for the right to be mischievous and dissident, and for the right to needle and poke and provoke the pearl clutchers and hand wringers. I'm a person who doesn't just make unpopular arguments, but I do it in a deliberately provocative way, and people wanted to support me anyway. And I think we should, as conservatives and libertarians, we should take huge comfort from that.
I do, and it's impressive to me. And you remind me of, if I may say so, the fight I had with the Human Rights Commission in Alberta almost 10 years ago, where deliberately saying, no, I'm not going to back down, I'm not going to apologize, I'm not going to try and be reasonable. I insist on the right to be offensive when I so choose, because I don't want to grant others the right to restrict me. I mean, that's an absolutist approach to being offensive that's very rare out there. And I think it's one of the reasons that you've had so much support, is that you're not cowering as so many people do.
I think that's right. I mean, I think everybody by now has seen your great opening statement during that sort of horrible show trial. It's one of the sort of iconic free speech videos on the internet. It's certainly something that I'd love to return to. And just, when I'm feeling a bit sort of low and I'm thinking, oh, maybe these guys have got a point, I go back and watch your speech and I'm fired up to go and be offensive again. And appreciating that the value of being offensive, the central importance of being offensive is that it protects us from real world violence. There's, of course, no such thing as violent speech. There are violent actions, and speech that is passionate and engaged and sometimes provocative and offensive is what stops us from shooting one another. And your opening speech in that ridiculous show trial is probably the best example of a sort of great passionate defense of that argument, and I love it. This has been another global example. My recent trending chaos has been another global example of just how important many people find free speech, particularly when they realize what the consequences of losing it are. And let's remember just how remarkable this outpouring was. I didn't get my account deleted. All Twitter did to me was remove the verified status. Because it was so brazenly and preposterously political, because they were using a tool designed to confirm the identity of public figures and media personalities to sort of punish people for ideological infractions, users went nuts. Twitter's shareholders are going to be asking themselves, given the stagnant growth in user numbers, given the fact that Twitter's share price is now at its lowest ever, below $20, shareholders are going to be asking, what are the criteria that Twitter is using, that Twitter support teams and the people in mid and low management who determine these ridiculous abuse and harassment policies, which have been expanded to include ridicule and disagreement. Shareholders are going to want to know, what are these policies? Because these policies are significantly damaging the prospects of this company. They're damaging the prospects of this company by denying the vast majority of users the right to speak and express themselves how they choose to. And this is one of those wonderful moments when, free speech warriors like you and me get a little glimpse into the heart of the public, and we get a little moment of contact with them, and we realize that actually it's not just us. Most people agree with us, not with the censors, not with the hand wringers, not with the pearl clutchers, not with the fainting couch feminists, but in fact most people are on the side of those who fight for the right to be provocative, interesting, robust, and yes, sometimes offensive. It's such an important battle, and I think, as I said earlier, we should all take heart from what we've seen.
I think you're so right. I mean, who would want to be part of an information source that is deliberately weeding out the most interesting, most funny, most controversial? But of course, it's only one-sided. I mean, there are extremely crude and offensive comedians, some of whom I follow just for entertainment or just to know what's going on the center or on the left. It seems to be that the censorship tips only one way. There's anti-Semitism. There's something I follow, is radical Islam and Jews in the West. Anti-Semitism is ubiquitous on Twitter, and I don't call for censorship of it, but the accusation of Islamophobia leads to people being shut down all the time. It's only one way. If you're conservative, if you're worried about radical Islam, those are the folks being censored so far.
Yes, and you only need to look at the decisions Twitter makes because it is notoriously opaque. It refuses to be honest about the criteria for deletions, suspensions, all the rest of it. It is opaque, so the only thing we can do is look at past behavior. And when we do that, we discover that entirely and almost without exception, the people who are suspended, the people who get into trouble, are conservatives. Look at the double standards, right? Look at the sorts of people who are still, for example, allowed to have a verified tick. Convicted rapists, whether it's, celebrities like Mike Tyson, or people who have horrible things that, alleged at them like Bill Cosby. Look at the groups who are allowed to speak with impunity on Twitter's network. Feminists who are allowed to tweet, kill all white men. ISIS, who are allowed to recruit and market themselves on Twitter almost with impunity. Twitter has to be shamed into acting by, hacking groups like Anonymous before it will make moves to censor some of these people. But conservatives, like a gay columnist cracking a joke about feminism, that's cause for censure. I think we know what Twitter's priorities are because it has shown us time and time and time again. It has a long history of brazenly partisan political posturing and maneuvering to discredit, delegitimize, and ridicule conservatives. Yeah. And I think now it's time for the company to be honest with its users, honest with its investors about what its priorities are. If this company has given up on ever trying to make money, the users are flatlining, if not going down, the stock price is tanking. If this company knows it's not going anywhere and is simply going to turn itself into a far left attack vector, we should know that. Journalists should know that. Readers should know that. And its own investors should know that.
Yeah, what's interesting is, and when I knew that you were a serious phenomenon, I enjoy your audacity, your sense of humor. I support so much of your politics. But this left just the sphere of politics and social justice wars. When I saw a high-level Silicon Valley investor, Mark Andreessen, I think is how you pronounce his last name, like a serious tech guy, when he started talking about this, when CNN Money did a story about this, when BuzzFeed, which is a left-wing website, wrote a fairly neutral and objective treatment of you, I thought, wow, this is moving outside just politics, because if you can censor someone in an opaque way for politics today, it could be anyone tomorrow. Do you think that there are some actual shareholders or directors of Twitter who are talking to their boss, Jack, and saying, look, if you lose your reputation for free speech, that's the lifeblood of the internet, you will cause economic harm. Do you think there's voices like that Silicon Valley boss actually talking to the top decision makers at Twitter?
Well, what's interesting is the previous CEO, Dick Costolo, had a really good record on free speech. And of course, one of the reasons that it suggested he was ousted is he had too bad a record on effectively censoring conservatives. Now, Jack Dorsey, told Nick Bilton, for his book, Hatching Twitter, that he wanted Twitter effectively to be considered almost like a utility. He wanted Twitter to be like running water. Well, I don't remember the last time the water company came to me and shut my service off or started giving me a less good quality service because I had the wrong opinions. This is not how you run a utility. Now, some conservatives will be uncomfortable about the idea of Twitter being regulated as it were a utility. They think that this speech should be left to the public, to the private sector. But we have to consider, even as robust conservatives, whether that's actually working. Aaron Swartz, the late founder of Reddit, said that censorship, which normally only has a meaning in a political context, may be pertinent in new technology companies that have vast platforms that monopolize certain kinds of speech and which create new public squares that nobody else can really get into. Now, Twitter has such gigantic purchase on the media, on what stories are covered and how they're covered, that it has a significant impact on our democracy and on our public debate. If Jack Dorsey, whose tenure at Twitter has been marked only by excessive policing of conservatives and by a nosediving stock price, is determined to prioritize the needs of rich white feminists and Black Lives Matter protesters over security concerns, over being fair, over being open, being transparent, being reasonable to his own users and honest with them about his priorities, if he cannot do that on his own, I don't know what the solution is. I think what's probably going to happen is not government regulation, but simply that Twitter will fail. Many people think that the company is already past its best. It will never recover. Its stocks will never recover. Its reputation will never recover. And just let's remember, there's a really important thing from this is the bipartisan nature of the criticism that has happened as a result of my, circus, effectively, from this petty thing they did to me. It has been support from all sides, from comedians, from journalists, people who understand the threat to freedom of expression and to creative freedom from censorship. But the BuzzFeed piece is a good example, but there have been others too. This is breaking out as a really serious issue, and people are now asking, has Twitter had its day? People are saying, with the stock price tanking, users alienated, and all of these questions around who is allowed to make jokes on the platform, since they've now delegitimized a gay satirist, like, where is this going to end? Who is going to be next? Everyone is asking, will it be me? And those are the conditions under which social networks falter and fail. We've seen it before. There's no reason to suppose Twitter will be any different. When you start aggressively policing platforms with anonymity, it has never worked in the past. You can do it on Facebook when you tie identities to real world, when you tie names to real world identities in a much more concrete, sort of anchored way. But in a platform like Twitter, where anybody can call themselves anything and sign up for dozens of accounts, policing language like this has never worked, can never work. It is technologically impossible. It is immoral, and it is going to be the death of the platform if they don't fix it.
You're on fire today, my friend. I'm very generous for your time. I do have one last question for you.
Sure.
And this was a strange attack on you. As you mentioned, Twitter took off your little blue check mark that says verified, which is...
They did. I feel like a member of the proletariat now.
It's bizarre because, that's really an identity verification tool, that this is the real Milo and other accounts are not. So it's so weird that you've been unpersoned, to use an Orwellian phrase. But let me throw another scenario at you, because this was a gentle slap at you. You were still able to marshal this counterattack so successfully. Yes. But let me throw something at you. What would have happened if they would have deleted your account like they did to a guy named Charles Johnson? What would have happened if Google would delete your YouTube account? What if Facebook would suspend you there? Because the presidents or chief executives of all three of those companies, YouTube, which is owned by Google, Facebook, and Twitter, all have announced in the last month that they are going to bring more policing. In Germany, all three of them have been compelled by Angela Merkel to do more policing. So you were able to fight back because you were only slapped, not crushed, so to speak. What happens if you were just unpersoned completely? If Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter said there is no more Milo, how do we fight back then?
Well, you can't, in a way. Conservatives haven't traditionally been very good at building their own platforms. We certainly haven't had much of an example of that happening yet. I always hear about people who say they're going to do it, and these platforms never get the purchase that we're hoping. Twitter was smart in a way. It knew, if you look at the outcry, this has been a gigantic, huge thing going on for days. One of the reasons I haven't shaved for your show, I'm so sorry. I've had no time to do anything else. They were very smart in a way. By doing this, they hoped to sidestep the controversy. They hoped that, and they did it on a Friday night, of course, so they hoped that it would all blow over by Monday. It hasn't all blown over by Monday. It's still continuing to get worse for them. I think that they thought that just by taking my blue tick away, they'd be able to sort of ride it out. That's not what's happening. Imagine how much worse it would have been if they had banned me. I think the conservative media would be in an uproar. There would be an outright revolt. I don't think any of these companies have the balls to do that. I said to Charles Johnson at the time, I think that banning me would be different from banning him, because I think I'm more likable, and people don't mind coming to my defense, whereas he tends to make a lot of enemies wherever he goes with what is unquestionably some very robust and most of the time rock solid reporting. But he enjoys burning bridges, whereas I quite like to build them. So I think that's part of why they've approached us differently. But also just the sheer scale of my sort of fans and following made it politically impossible for them to do that. I guess they're waiting for me to say something so outrageous that nobody could reasonably disagree with me being banned. But they're the sort of statements that, of course, I never make, and I haven't made, and don't deserve to have had my status revoked over already. if, conservatives and libertarians, and it's particularly libertarians, it's particularly this new cultural libertarian movement who want to crack jokes. They're defined by mischief and irreverence, these cultural libertarians. I think that you're one. I'm one. You've got people like Gavin McInnes, Christina Hoff Sommers, Dave Rubin, Lauren Southern from your network. These people who like to be mischievous and irreverent, they're the people that really get under the skin of the progressive elites. And they're the people who are going to start, I think, to disappear from these platforms over the next couple of years. When that happens, when the first person goes, when the first one of us with significant sort of clout and weight and institutional backing behind us gets wiped out, I think that's the time for us all to draw a line in the sand and say, no more, we're leaving. And I don't know when that's going to be, and I don't know who it's going to be, but it is coming. They're going to try it, and when they try it, I hope that we can get a similar response from the public that I've had this weekend. No more, enough. If you continue to do this to people that we want to listen to, who are not doing any harm, they're not abusing people, they're not harassing people, they are merely expressing themselves, with deploying criticism and ridicule, essential tools of democratic discourse. If you continue to do this to the people that we respect and like, we will leave. And the worst thing that any of these platforms could do would be to ban somebody like you or somebody like me, because it will be the biggest nail thus far in their coffins, and it will trigger a mass user exodus.
Milo Yiannopoulos, you're very generous with your time. Keep up the fight for freedom. I think right now you are the leading spokesman for the right to free speech and against the counterfeit right not to be offended. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
Stay with us. After the break, Brian Lilley talks to us about an access to information request that Justin Trudeau has ordered the government not to answer. That's after these words.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
Welcome back to the show. One of the things that frustrates me so much about the mass Muslim migration that has swamped Germany, and now Justin Trudeau wants to bring it to Canada, is that we can't get even basic information, basic who, what, where, why, when information from the government. Justin Trudeau, who campaigned against what he said was Stephen Harper's muzzling and lack of transparency, is now going to extreme lengths to blur exactly what his plans are. Is it because he is still making those plans on the go, or is it because he doesn't want to show us the plans? Well, we just don't know. Well, joining us now via Skype from Ottawa is my friend and co-founder of The Rebel, Brian Lilley, who's been doing some very specific work on this. Hey, Brian, great to see you.
Good to speak to you, Ezra.
We're just asking basic questions like, who are you bringing over? Where are you getting them from? And we recently submitted an access to information request. Well, let me hand it over to you to tell our viewers the rest of the facts. Tell me about your latest story.
Well, the latest story is a kind of a follow-up to last week. And last week, I described how we kept hearing about how the government's collecting all this data, biometric data, biographical data, and then they will compare all the information that they have on would-be Syrian refugees or migrants against databases, Canadian databases, whatever they can find from Syria, the UN, the US. So we said, all right, let's see the questionnaire. We were shocked when they said, well, we looked through our records and there is no questionnaire. So either A, they're lying, or they're playing word games. Maybe it's a form or an application, but it's not a questionnaire. That would be word games, and actually doing that would be in violation of the Access to Information Law. And we found that really shocking. But then, shortly after that, late last week, we started getting these replies back, and I went over them on the weekend. Ezra, we were asking things like, talk to us, tell us what you know about security or health-related issues for the plane load of refugees that Prime Minister Trudeau met at the beginning of December, because we had a tip-off that some people, I believe it was almost 24, were put into quarantine that came off that plane. Remember the one that Trudeau went to Pearson Airport in Toronto to greet personally?
Right.
All right, so we tried finding out through public relations officers, was this a Was this a security concern? Were there health concerns? Were there people with tuberculosis? We couldn't find out. So we went the other route. We submitted an access to information request. It's a very formal, very specific way to get information from the government. And it's supposed to be open to everyone, and they're supposed to respond within 30 days. Instead, they said, now they're saying anywhere from 275 to 300 days. We also asked about concerns about the list of refugees handed over from the Turkish government to the Canadian government, and we asked about specific religious accommodation. We have other requests in the queue that we haven't received back, but they've come back and they said, no, instead of 30 days, it's going to be 275 to 300. But here's the catch. They also specifically say this is because of the mandate given to them by Justin Trudeau. Helen Bertrand, who is the person the person in charge of handling these files, says also it is to be noted that at this point of the process, the department is working to meet the mandate on Syrian refugees set by the Prime Minister of Canada. Well, as you pointed out, Ezra, Justin Trudeau was also elected on openness and transparency. He made it a huge part of his campaign. And in fact, the only private member's bill he sponsored in the last session of Parliament was about updating the Access to Information Act, making it more accessible for Canadians, and getting rid of all these exemptions that the department's now using to simply delay until the point that it doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah, we saw the carefully staged, managed videos when Harjit Sajjan and John McCallum, two cabinet ministers, went to Jordan in one of these quickly set up intake centers at a refugee camp. So this was showing off how Canadian bureaucrats were interviewing prospective migrants, and we saw them in a room being interviewed. So great, just send us the list of questions. I mean, they're using that list of questions presumably every day. Call it a checklist, a questionnaire, whatever it is, a form. As you properly point out, the access to information laws are designed to, they say that they must be answered in the spirit of the question. You can't be like a hair splitter and say, oh, it's not a questionnaire, it's just a form. So we know those questions are being asked. We've seen the PR films that the Liberal government wanted us to see of these would-be refugees being interviewed. It's shocking to me that they wouldn't release a form. Let me ask you this. This morning, you published on our website, TheRebel.media, copies of these letters back to us from the Access to Information officers saying, we won't tell you for 300 days. Have you had any comments, any solidarity from other journalists saying, whoa, what a secretive government, whoa, why are they hiding? Or has the media said, oh, who cares, it's just the Rebel, and we don't want to ask tough questions about refugees? Which of those two things happened?
Well, as you might not be shocked, there's not a whole lot. Basically, talk radio will pick this up, and that will be it. That's what happened last week. So it's getting some pickup on talk radio, just like last week's story about the lack of questionnaire was picked up on talk radio. But it's not going anywhere else. And you know that were this mean Steve Harper, that this would be a story for days, it would be headline news, it would be constant. Look, I don't care if it's liberal or conservative. I couldn't tell you how many stories I've written about access to information and the fact that government departments won't tell us what's going on. And that was under the Harper government. So I don't care who's in charge. We have a right to know. We're the citizens. We're the taxpayers. They work for us. But bureaucrats, politicians, they don't like the public they serve looking over their shoulder. That's what this is about. And in case anyone wonders, how do you know they've got a questionnaire for these potential refugees, these migrants coming in? Well, Ezra, we are doing the heavy lifting on this file. And I specifically asked John McCallum and I asked officials on background about, are you looking out for ethnic and religious minorities as you're bringing people in? And they said no. And I said, well, how can you not track that? And they said, our data fields don't allow us to enter that. We can't follow that. Well, if you have specific data fields that you have to fill out in your computer system, you have to have specific questions that you're asking. Otherwise, you're going to have, intake officer A asking questions that pop into his mind and intake officer B asking whatever questions pop into her mind. Yeah. None of it's going to fit into the data fields.
Yeah. It's incredible. I would strike a deal with Trudeau if I could. I would say, fine, take 300 days to give us the questionnaire. In the meantime, why don't we pause the flood of Muslim migrants for those same 300 days? If you need 300 days to get your act together, Justin Trudeau, if you need 300 days to get your paperwork straight, to find out what questions you're asking, fine. Take 300 days. And Brian, let me close by referring to our survey, our petition rather, that we were asking Canadians to sign. And it's called refugeepause.ca. I think if the government needs 300 days to get its act together, we can put a refugeepause.ca on for 300 days too. Brian, great to see you again. Thanks for doing the kind of work that no other journalists in Ottawa are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, my friends. Actually, after the break, come right on back. I've got your viewer mail. You don't want to miss that. That's ahead after these words.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Welcome back to my favorite part of the show, viewer feedback. Sam writes, Ezra, what happens when the censors come for you in The Rebel? What are you going to do if YouTube pulls your videos? The Rachel Notley laughing video was already taken off. Do you have a backup plan if and when YouTube clamps down on your videos? Hi, Sam. Good point. You're right. Back in December, we did a video commentary showing this clip of Rachel Notley laughing at farmers. Here, take a look just for a minute to refresh your memory.
And then there was my favorite bill. But you know, it really is. And then there was Bill 6. Now,
well, my commentary on that video went super viral. It was literally the second most shared YouTube video in all of Canada for 2 days, until the NDP and the media party ganged up and managed to convince YouTube to take the video down until actually today. I'll have more on this terrible story of censorship tomorrow. I'll tell you the whole thing, but you're right. We can't trust Facebook or YouTube or Twitter not to censor us. As you might recall, right before New Year's, I did a show on how the chief executives of those three companies publicly declared that they were going to crack down on political commentary they didn't like. The Google boss actually said it was like a spell check for political ideas. He said that, spell check, as in there's a right way and a wrong way to think, and he'll tell you what you can say on Google and YouTube. So yeah, that remains a threat to us. You'll see our responses in the months ahead, how we mitigate against this risk. Mr. Bohm writes, the mayor of Cologne wants a code of conduct for German women to cover up, among other things. Sound familiar? Sound like Sharia law? We'll all be wearing burqas. It's not just her. Have you seen a single feminist from the usual suspects talking about the mass sexual assault? The feminists who complain, say there are not enough women in video games, or that men sit on the subway in a way that's man-spreading, as they say, or any manner of feminist hysteria. Have you ever seen any of these feminists comment on the mass sexual assault in Cologne, Germany, or similar versions which have been reported across Europe? But it's not just feminists who are now for Sharia law, for hijabs, for women clearing off the streets. Politicians and journalists too. They literally will throw rape victims under the bus to promote their new favorite ism. It's not feminism anymore, it's multiculturalism. So much for women's rights. And here's the last letter I'd like to read. It was actually a Facebook post by our friend David Goldman. It was so good, I just wanted to read it to you. Here it goes. David Goldman says, regarding Germany and the rapists, imagine an old man who has committed terrible crimes and lives in a stupor of self-disgust. He has an estranged child, but no grandchildren. He seeks diversion in tasteless entertainment and finds only boredom. He knows that he does not have long to live. On an impulse, he adopts a street urchin and brings him into his home, treats him like his own child, gives him everything. He becomes obsessed with the child, the object of his last chance to justify his life on earth. The street kid turns out to be a sociopath. He steals from his benefactor, destroys his property, even beats him. But the old man refuses to throw the kid out of his house. What does it matter, he thinks to himself. I'll be dead soon anyway. Perhaps at the end, I can do some good. Childless, dying Germany wants redemption. It wants redemption more than it wants dignity. There are no crimes so wretched that the migrant mob might commit that would persuade Germany to throw them out. Germany can't save itself. It only can serve as a horrible example for the rest of us. That's David Goldman. He's so right. It's a national act of psychotherapy and penitence. Angela Merkel wants to punish herself and her whole country. If you doubt it, look at this video that we first showed you a few months ago. Look at Angela Merkel's reaction when she is merely given a German flag to hold at a political rally. She is so disgusted by it, by the very symbol of her country. She despises Germany as a German place. She wants it to be a mere place on a map, but everything German about its past wiped out, replaced by whatever hooligans can traipse across its borders. I think Goldman nailed it, don't you think? Well, that's our show today. Big theme is on freedom of speech, censorship, and in Brian's case, trying to get basic questions answered about refugees that the government doesn't want to be answered. That's almost a free speech issue, too. Tune in tomorrow. We'll have so much more, and keep watching all our commentaries here at TheRebel.media. Good night for now, and keep fighting for freedom.